This was the kind of secret meant for the shadows. No whispers, no rolling cameras, and definitely no public commentary. Yet, during the high-stakes 2026 World Cup qualifiers in San Juan, the American squad exposed a truth that the basketball community had been dreading for months. A head coach vanished mid-competition. A substitute leader emerged. The entire starting rotation was flipped upside down. Podium statements struck with more force than any official bulletin, while Caitlin Clark transformed from a bench warmer into the unstoppable engine of the entire offensive machine. 10th and pure velocity. As Christy Sides watched Clark bury her second long-range bomb, the question became unavoidable. Why was a balanced strategy stifling the planet's premier playmaker? These victories were so absolute and undeniable that the sports world had no choice but to pause, witness the greatness, and acknowledge the shift. This is the full narrative. From a cold December session in North Carolina to a 5-game masterclass in Puerto Rico, this is only the opening chapter of the Durham prep. To grasp why the situation in San Juan exploded the way it did, one must revisit December 2025 at a Durham training center where Caitlin Clark arrived for her debut camp with the elite national roster. Forget the idea of a courtesy invitation or a simple marketing gimmick. This marked the dawn of a fresh era for the world's most dominant basketball program, with Duke's own Kara Lawson taking the reins as head coach. We are now joined by the fresh architect of Duke basketball, Kara Lawson, a leader chosen to command the national team through the 2028 Olympic Games in Los Angeles, taking over for Cheryl Reeve, who previously steered the program through the 2024 Paris tournament. Lawson assembled a staff dripping with professional prestige, including Stephanie White, the very mentor who guided Clark through a chaotic first year in Indiana. Joining them were Natalie Nassi from the Valkyries and Nate Tibbetts of the Mercury, a tactical genius renowned for orchestrating elite professional offenses. On paper, this represented perhaps the most decorated coaching brain trust ever put together for a national team cycle. In reality, this arrangement quietly sowed the seeds for the most controversial plotline of the qualifiers, as the history between these coaches and their stars proved impossible to ignore. The public never saw the grueling work Clark was putting in behind closed doors during that winter camp. She was recovering from a punishing 2025 professional season, a year that was effectively derailed by a string of leg injuries, limiting her to a mere 13 appearances on the court. Let that sink in. 13 games. This was the same phenom who demolished every scoring record in college history while at Iowa. By Sunday, the legendary Hawkeye standout, the woman who became the top scorer in Division I history and shattered viewership records during her 2024 rookie campaign, averaging 18 points and 8 assists, was a ghost of her former self. That superstar spent the bulk of 2025 trapped in rehabilitation rooms and on exercise bikes instead of competing on the hardwood. It all began with an ankle issue that sidelined her during the early stages of the season. A subsequent groin injury made matters worse, robbing her of the ability to plant her foot or explode toward the rim with her signature power. She lost the very spark that had turned every one of her games into a mandatory viewing event for fans. She was absent from the All-Star festivities and missed the postseason entirely. Dressed in street clothes, she watched from the bench as her Indiana teammates, led by Stephanie White, her new national coach, made a deep playoff run without her. A full year of elite competition was essentially stripped away from her career. Consequently, when she showed up in Durham, everyone wondered which version of Clark would actually step onto the floor. Could she still move with that elite lateral quickness? Could she handle the physical brutality and finishing required at the international level? Would her frame endure 5 intense matches in a packed schedule with almost no time to recover? Within the private, controlled environment of that December camp, the early signs were incredibly promising. Clark collaborated with the national medical team, pushing through intense solo drills to restore her conditioning and rebuild the vital connection between her physical limits and her basketball instincts. By the time she finally appeared before the media on the practice floor, she looked revitalized, moving with a level of burst and self-assurance that suggested her physical struggles were a thing of the past. Clark eventually admitted that she felt better than she had in months, noting that her ankle finally allowed her to unleash her full potential again. I feel like I have finally found my rhythm over these past few weeks, feeling stronger than I have in a very long time. Clearly, my compromised ankle stifled any chance of a proper release. Yet, the lenses missed a brewing storm, the friction over her tactical role that would only ignite once the buzzer sounded. The phenom stood poised for greatness, yet the haunting mystery remained. Could the rigid machine actually accommodate such a powerhouse? Clark remained patient until March 2026, when the spotlight shifted to San Juan, Puerto Rico for the World Cup qualifiers. Having conquered the America Cup just months prior, the American squad had already punched their ticket to the global stage. Consequently, this five-game stretch served as a mere dress rehearsal, a playground for experimentation and synergy before the true firestorm erupted in Berlin. Rankings aside, the atmosphere crackled with intensity. The world was about to witness the elite international debut of Clark, Reese, and Buchers. A trio of legendary prospects converged, uniting their immense legacies on the worldwide platform for the very first time. Legions of supporters flooded the arena, creating a massive sea of anticipation. The digital sphere roared as Clark's jerseys outsold the rest of the squad combined. Global media fixated their lenses on Puerto Rico, breathless to witness Lawson's strategy for unleashing this unprecedented wave of talent. The collective heartbeat of the sport wasn't just racing, it was making history. Such fervor was unheard of for a qualifier, but the motive was clear, yet the opening matchups delivered a shock that left the world reeling. Lawson approached the bench on a reconnaissance quest, famously insisting that control should never be surrendered to outside influences, refused to let any outside voice dictate the internal rhythm of the squad. Her goal was to dissect chemistry and forge an enduring legacy through experimental pairings, a reasonable pursuit on paper. However, her execution proved cold and inflexible, cycling through all 12 athletes with the soulless precision of a machine. Full roster swaps mirrored a hockey game, a brutal cycle that ultimately relegated Clark to the backup squad. Excluded from the starters, she waited alongside Howard and Plum while the established veterans like Gray anchored the initial minutes. Young and Mabray, alongside a shifting interior, controlled the opening tip-off night after night. The visual was jarring and undeniably harsh. The game's brightest supernova, the very engine of the hype train, sat relegated to the sidelines as the jump ball soared. Despite the slight, Clark remained poised, even as thousands traveled vast distances solely to catch a glimpse of her magic. Crowds from every corner of the map gathered for the opener against Senegal, desperate for a taste of the Clark experience. Entering as a substitute, she unleashed a masterclass that obliterated every conservative forecast. Posting 17 points and 12 dimes, she shattered the record books for an American debutante on the global circuit. She wasn't just a cog in the wheel, she fundamentally rewired the flow and spacing of the entire offensive engine. Afterward, Lawson hailed her as a premier global playmaker, admitting her presence instantly sharpened the brilliance of her teammates. Yet the status quo persisted. The second clash against Puerto Rico saw the same rigid, heavy substitution pattern remain untouched. Clark shone once more with 12 points and 5 assists, cementing a smooth victory through undeniable dominance and statistical prowess. The tactical cage remained locked, turning the fans' mounting annoyance into a full-blown roar of indignation. The internet went up in flames, echoed by a singular, haunting query that grew deafening with every passing minute. Why? With the most magnetic force in basketball clearly dominating, why stifle her potential within such a restrictive strategic box? Did the leadership shift occur only after the head coach made her exit? This pivotal chapter remains a hotbed of debate, though Lawson expressed genuine heartache over departing her squad mid-journey. Leaving during a potential championship surge was painful, yet her commitment to the Duke Blue Devils was a long-standing priority. Juggling the NCAA tournament alongside national duties, she faced heavy criticism for this double-edged sword of professional obligations. The moment the college calendar required her full attention, she departed the national bench, leaving Nate Tibbetts of the Phoenix Mercury to seize the reins as the temporary commander. Official reports painted the transition as a routine, calculated maneuver with zero cause for alarm. However, the immediate shift in the team's heartbeat under Tibbetts' watch whispered a far more rebellious tale. The suffocating systematic mass substitutions were instantly discarded into the dustbin of history. He demolished the artificial pecking order that protected established names while ignoring the actual sparks flying on the hardwood. In its stead rose a pure, merit-driven philosophy, the kind of elite-level coaching where production dictates position. It was merit-based, focusing on the playmakers who actually moved the needle every time they had possession. And Caitlin Clark stood as the primary beneficiary of this strategic pivot. That clash with Italy was the moment the evolution became undeniable, as the starting five hit a wall. 3 minutes into the contest, the offense had already ground to a total standstill. Italy choked the paint and passing lanes, daring the Americans to survive on tough outside shots. The starters simply had no answer. With the ball sticking, every offensive sequence felt labored and entirely easy to predict. Fans expecting a masterclass instead watched a powerhouse sleepwalk through a game they were expected to dominate. Tibbets looked to his bench and signaled for number 22. Clark checked in at 6:46 in the first. Paige finds an opening inside, kicks it out to Clark, and she buries it nothing but net. What followed was described by those watching in real time as a complete and total takeover. In the 6.5 minutes Clark piloted the squad, Team USA exploded for 23 points, 23. The opening five scraped together 5 points in 3 minutes. The math doesn't just support Clark, it shouts her name. The court's geometry shifted the second she touched the rock. Italy's defense looked comfortable until that exact moment. Suddenly, defenders were scrambling to cover ground they never expected to defend as driving lanes finally materialized. Cross-court passes found shooters in rhythm, and the previously dead pick-and-roll became a weapon Italy could not stop. Clark finished with 12 points and 5 assists as they cruised to a 93-59 victory. But the score was secondary to how lethal this squad looked the moment the chains were cut. This highlighted exactly why Tibbets was such a departure from the coach who came before him. He didn't hide behind vague coaching cliches or the sanitized language used to protect egos and manage appearances. Standing at the podium, he bluntly acknowledged that the previous philosophy had been fundamentally flawed. Look, there are athletes I've spent 2 years coaching against, but you never truly grasp who they are. He stopped short of directly blaming Lawson for the struggles. He didn't frame the situation as a total disaster. Instead, he signaled that defined roles and building around the elite creators was the only viable path forward. He argued they peaked with structure and clear jobs rather than treating playing time like a participation trophy. Reporters in the room caught the massive weight of his words almost instantly. A head coach was essentially standing before the cameras, confirming what the box scores had been screaming for days. The old system had been failing to unlock Clark in the way her generational talent demanded. He didn't raise his voice or hunt for a viral soundbite to make his point. It hit like a lightning strike anyway. In the cautious world of international ball, Tibbets' honesty was remarkably bold. He chose clarity over political maneuvering. He prioritized hard evidence over the established hierarchy, and the basketball community took notice. With Clark fully unleashed, the showdown with New Zealand signaled the next phase of the evolution. New Zealand remains winless while the Americans stay perfect in San Juan. What a find inside for Reese. Tibbets didn't just tweak the rotation, he threw the old script in the trash. Clark finally started the game alongside Chelsea Gray, Kelsey Plum, Monique Billings, and De'Erica Hamby. The result was exactly what every critic had been calling for, and it wasn't even a contest. Team USA dismantled New Zealand 101-46, with Clark running the point with absolute authority. 14 points on elite efficiency, with 6 assists in just 23 minutes of masterclass basketball. The offensive tempo accelerated instantly. The ball found open hands in perfect rhythm as the spacing finally looked exactly as it should. Cutters moved with purpose rather than standing still, and the team's entire energy shifted in a major way. For the first time in this entire run, Clark looked comfortable in a role that matched her capabilities. She was no longer forced to hunt for impact in limited, desperate minutes off the bench. She was the one dictating the pace and elevating every single teammate on the floor in the process. The shift from those opening matches felt so jarring that even the most detached spectators started pointing it out. This went beyond swapping jerseys. It was a loud proclamation of what happens when a squad stops hesitating to unleash its true engines. Every single statistic exploded off the page in breathtaking, high-definition clarity. Under the previous regime, the scoring rhythm felt like a series of staccato, disconnected bursts. With Tibbets pulling the strings and Clark at the heart of it, the play turned into an unstoppable engine, a relentless tidal wave that defied every adjustment. Yet, Tibbets was just getting started, eventually pulling a stunt that essentially shattered the basketball corner of the internet. He finally united Clark and Paige Buchers as a dual threat in the backcourt. This was the holy grail fans had envisioned for months, two once-in-a-lifetime maestros orchestrating the floor in perfect harmony. Either one could ignite a scoring run from literally any square inch of the hardwood. Both could drain deep shots from 30 feet while smothered by defenders. Clark fires a bullet to Paige Buchers, who feeds Monique Billings for 2 as USA dominates. They both possess the uncanny ability to thread needles that most pros wouldn't even perceive as open lanes. What followed was a masterclass in scoring that honestly felt a bit like cheating. Putting those two side by side made the defensive calculus nearly unsolvable for any opponent. Clean looks for shooters appeared out of thin air because defenders were terrified of drifting away from either superstar. Lanes to the rim stayed clear because shadowing Clark meant giving Buchers a map to the hoop. And if you cheated toward Buchers, you gave Clark a wide-open highway straight to the basket. The middle of the floor was suddenly vulnerable in ways it never was, when the strategy relied on less explosive playmakers. It was the kind of undeniable proof that silences every skeptic instantly. No more online debates or statistical nitpicking. The reality was right there for anyone with eyes to see. Tibbetts didn't treat that duo as some fun side project. He wielded them like a lethal blade, ready to strike whenever the stakes got high. The riddle of how to use Clark. We need to pause and look at the bigger picture, moving past the storm of digital fury and fan theories. Kara Lawson's initial strategy wasn't some shadow plot meant to sabotage her star player. She was perfectly blunt about these early rounds being a trial phase, making that clear to the press long before the first whistle blew. Her goal was simply to figure out which combinations clicked and which ones clunked. The blueprint was set for the World Cup in Berlin and the Los Angeles Games in 2028. And there was a solid method to that madness. She was managing a group of 12 individuals who had never really functioned as a single unit before. They were coming from various pro teams, each with their own specialized playbooks and distinct roles to unlearn. Without a traditional season to build rapport, the national program usually treats these early windows exactly like a laboratory. When Cheryl Reeve was assembling the 2024 Olympic roster, the process looked remarkably similar. There were stages of trial and error where the lineup was a revolving door until the final squad was locked in. Shuffling the deck to see how the pieces settle isn't crazy. It's actually how elite global programs are carefully constructed. Even while keeping Clark on the bench to start, Lawson offered nothing but glowing reviews in her briefings, acknowledging the titan she had on her hands. She openly labeled the young guard a once-in-a-generation phenomenon. She marveled at how the entire tempo shifted into overdrive the moment Clark took control of the ball. But kind words and actual playtime are different animals, and the reality on the wood told a story that logic couldn't ignore. Operating under a ticking clock, Tibbetts felt the pressure. With no time for experiments and a desperate need for a win, he followed the trail of breadcrumbs the data had left since day one. That right there is the friction at the heart of this saga. Two valid coaching mindsets clashing in one tournament, yielding wildly different outcomes from the very same group of players. One path left Clark caged, sparking a fan firestorm that almost eclipsed the scoreboards. When Lawson kept her sidelined, the web exploded with claims that the coaches were choking her talent out of petty resentment. Rumors flew about seniority bias or some hidden civil war within the locker room that nobody would admit to. Snapshots of Clark standing near Stephanie White or her regular fever coach went viral. Even her mentor acting as a national assistant wasn't enough to calm the storm. Armchair psychologists dissected every twitch and frown frame by frame, certain they had found evidence of a deep, unspoken rift. Digital rumors surged as fans revisited the friction between White and Clark during their Indiana Fever tenure together. Gossip centered on White's 2025 remarks that seemed to diminish the star's role, identifying Mitchell as the squad's vital scoring heart, a move that deeply offended the star's massive following. Skeptics pointed to the 2024 Paris selection snub as definitive proof of a systemic bias, arguing that leaving the world's most recognizable star at home revealed a concerted effort by the basketball elite to suppress her rise. If any of that, grievances actually influenced the recent on-court performance in Puerto Rico remains impossible for any spectator to truly confirm. Yet, in the social media era, mass perception often transforms into its own reality for those already eager to validate their suspicions. The story practically finished itself before the coaching staff could offer a single syllable of explanation. Tibbetts eventually validated through his press comments and tactical rotations on the floor that a significant and visible discrepancy existed between her initial deployment and the way she could have flourished from day one. He never threw around accusations. Instead of blaming internal chaos or stabbing peers in the back, he simply owned the change, detailing his strategy with a raw transparency seldom seen in pro sports while allowing the lopsided results to end any further debate. And that scoreline screamed volumes. The Americans went 5-0, beating opponents by over 30 points on average per game. She ended the qualifiers at the top of the assist charts, anchored the team with a massive plus 80-point differential that outperformed everyone else, and connected on 7 of 13 attempts from beyond the arc. Returning to the professional game, following 8 months of recovery, she immediately looked like the most lethal two-way playmaker on the entire national squad. She proved she could score from anywhere, navigate screens with perfect intuition, and bring a defensive intensity that her detractors had long mocked but can no longer dismiss. These statistics aren't just a brief stroke of luck. They represent a consistent performance through an international gauntlet against physical, smart defenders who studied her tape specifically to shut her down. They tried, but they failed. Berlin looms now. The spotlights will intensify, the pressure will skyrocket, and the time for second guessing has completely evaporated. The upcoming World Cup won't just decide who wins gold, it will put entire basketball philosophies on trial. Once she returns to the hardwood, the conversation about potential ends. Her performance history stands as an undeniable record, and the successful formula for her usage is already fully established. The remaining puzzle is which leaders will follow it. Will the old guard pivot to suit her talent? Or will they double down on trying to restrict a talent that has already shown it cannot be caged? If Puerto Rico served as the early warning, then Berlin is the ultimate rupture, where the spirit of play, the system, and the sport's future clash. Who flinches first?